Field by field, Maizex is bringing Canadian seed to farmers across Canada. Maizex is your source for high-performance soybeans and grain, silage, and grazing corn hybrids. Visit maizex.com to find your local Maizex representative.
For Real Agriculture, I'm Kelvin Hepner, and harvest is certainly underway across much of North America. There's a lot going on. It's a busy time of year. Add on top of that uncertainty in some cases about profitability with lower crop prices, questions about cash flow with railways and the prospect of a huge railway shutdown especially impacting farmers in Western Canada. And joining us to talk about some of these stressors at this time of year, we're pleased to welcome to Real Agriculture Gerry Friesen. Gerry is the Chief Administrative Officer, a founding member of the Manitoba Farmer Wellness Program. He's also the author of a new book called The Recovering Farmer. Welcome to Real Agriculture once again, Gerry.
Thanks for having me, Kelvin.
So, I just listed some of the things that are outside of farmers' control at this time of year. There's certainly a lot of pressure that farmers, I think, in many cases, are dealing with right now.
You're absolutely right, Kelvin, and it's a stressful time for grain farmers in particular this time of year because, of course, we all know they made a huge investment in spring and putting the crop in, tending to that crop. Of course, at the outset, we had excessive moisture in a lot of areas of the province, and then suddenly, boom, it dried up. And so there's always those unknowns. And then, of course, as you get ready to start taking the crop off, and as you just told me, you are already taking it off, then there's the uncertainty of the yield, quality, and all of that. Never mind in the bigger picture when you have things like in just a few days ago, of course, there was that threat of a rail strike. We're not entirely sure how that's going to turn out, but these things outside the control of a farmer create anxiety because they have certain obligations. They have their financial obligations that they need to meet, and when things like that crop up, it just adds to the uncertainty, and it's no fault of their own, and it's totally outside of their control, and so that creates that anxiety that we often talk about.
What are some of your tips in terms of coping with this pressure, this anxiety, this stress at this time of year as we are running around and it often feels like chaos in our world, and there's a lot of different things happening, like you said, outside of our control.
Right, and I think it's important, Calvin, that as individuals, number one, we have to understand the fact that we're not alone. There's others out there that are experiencing this too. I know from my own personal experience when I was farming and going through some difficult times that it's incredibly important that we verbalize that we're able to talk about it. And that might be to a family member, it might be to a neighbor, and of course, in situations, it's good to reach out for some professional help too. But I always challenge people first and foremost that it's important to talk about it. And in my mind, this talking about it does a few things. And I often reference when a neighbor dropped by when I was in a really tough place, and he allowed me to open up and talk about my situation. And as I talked and as this spewed out of my mouth, I came to understand some of what I was actually talking about didn't make sense. In my brain it did, but once I verbalized it, it didn't. And that's because we spend a lot of time worrying. And of course, worrying is letting our minds create something we don't want to have happen. But when we're able to talk about it, it clears the air on that and makes that load just a little bit lighter.
Yeah, and that's something that when you're sitting in the cab all day or hopping in and out of the truck all day, you may not have those meaningful conversations where you get that feedback from another person during a busy season.
You're absolutely right. And all that time alone just gives that brain so much more opportunity to start ruminating and creating scenarios, worst case scenarios, which doesn't help at all.
So do you have to be intentional then about having your family join you for supper kind of thing, or like you said, running into the neighbor and maybe taking that extra 30 seconds to chat with them, that kind of thing?
Absolutely, you have to be intentional, and if it happens without being intentional, good for you. But again, very often when folks face this kind of stress, they seem to pull back even a little bit more, and they don't want to bother going inside for dinner with the family, for example. They don't want to bother running into town for a quick coffee. They don't want to bother having a quick snooze because they just think they need to work harder. And so the more they work, the more they isolate themselves and the worse it can get. So I like that word of being intentional about it, Kelvin. I think that's really important.
You just mentioned having that quick snooze, that nap, maybe in the certain when it's timely, that kind of thing. Sleep is another big factor contributing to that anxiety if we're lacking sleep.
It certainly does, and I mean, I'm fortunate that I get to sleep really well, but I know that lack of sleep when we get tired, that creates even more of those unwanted thoughts and ruminations, and we'll spend time at night laying in bed wide awake, and of course that's the time when everything is dark around you, when you start worrying even more, and that anxiety just increases.
We mentioned the rail strike earlier, and I do sometimes wonder, and I know some farmers I think have a better coping strategy for this than others, and maybe what I do inherently as working also as a reporter, I certainly like to follow the news, but there's also the risk of getting caught up in broader societal anger and frustration and those types of pressures. How should we approach those types of issues where, yes, it is something important, and yes, it's something that affects us, and yes, it's something that we feel we need to speak out about, but at the same time, not letting it overwhelm us and add up or be a tipping point for us?
Well, and that's a good point, Kelvin. And of course, I've often said that social media may be the downfall of society because, of course, that's where you can get stuck down in the weeds and get involved in all these controversies and the ways people communicate things. And then suddenly things are communicated that aren't even true. And yet we fall into the trap of, oh no, now we're going down that road. And again, it just so people have to regulate themselves, and I know even before social media became such a big thing, I've talked to people, and I've done this myself, is where you have to come to the decision. You know what? I'm not doing that well. The news out there in the world, whether it's provincial, federally, globally, isn't that great. Perhaps I need to switch off for a while. Take a break from watching the news. Take a break from scrolling through social media. And I know that's easier said than done, but it's also interesting how your mental health will improve if you do these things.
Yeah. What do you recommend in terms of resources? I know you mentioned in some cases it is appropriate to seek professional help. How do you provide direction there when farmers have questions about like, is this something that I need to go seek help for, that kind of thing?
Well, and you know what? Go seek help for. Yes, ultimately, a lot of people could benefit from doing that. I've talked to folks that have said, well, you know what? It's not that I need help. I just need to get over this and things will improve. Uh, and sometimes it's as simple as just having that one or two conversations with a therapist, with a counselor. Sometimes having even more than that is beneficial. It's never been easier than it is now, Kelvin, in Manitoba. The Manitoba Farmer Wellness Program has been up and running now for 3 years. I believe we're in our third year. Um, and it's been successful in helping folks. I've seen the anecdotal evidence through testimonials I've seen. And like I say, it's incredibly simple. People can, but sorry, I was also going to say prior to that, we also have a Manitoba Farm and Rural Stress Line in Manitoba for crisis moments. That's always a good help too. One phone call can be beneficial. But if you need something a little bit more, all you need to do is go to our website at manitobafarmerwellness.ca. You can click on book an appointment. Our 4 counselors that we have pop up. You can read about the 4 counselors, their credentials, their bios. You can pick one that you feel might be best fit for you, and you make that appointment directly with them. It's free. It's 100% confidential, and I can guarantee you that it will be helpful.
And it's up to, you may have said this already, six sessions that you
It's
can have?
actually 9. It's
9.
actually
Oh, okay.
9. We were able to increase that to 9 earlier this year. It's for farmers, it's for their families, and also for farm employees.
All right. That's for farmers in Manitoba, certainly to check out. Gerry, do you hear from organizations or advocates for farmer mental health in other parts of Canada or North America looking at the model that you have here? Or do you look to others in other parts of the continent for how they serve farmers in this area?
Well, we were very fortunate, Kelvin, when we started our discussions and started building our program. We were able to look at what was happening on Prince Edward Island and Ontario and a few counties, very much built our program off of that. In the meantime, also, these programs have popped up in other places. I know Saskatchewan has a program, Alberta does, BC does, and in Eastern Canada, certainly if they don't yet, they are working on that as well. So yes, it's available pretty much right across Canada.
All right. Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about having somewhat of a regional or local aspect or organization feel behind some of these services as well.
Well, and it's helpful, Kelvin, when you talk about that regional aspect. I agree with you. We have a great board of directors in our program. Most of us, all of us, have certain credibility out in the agricultural world. We're able to go to trade shows. We're able to talk to groups, and so people get a level of comfort with what there is, because of course there's still a stigma involved, right, and always has been, although it's decreasing. People still feel that way, but yet when they talk to people that they know or have heard about before, they can make that connection, which gives them a level of comfort.
All right. Well, thank you, Gerry, for taking the time to join us and to have this important conversation and some reminders along the way to like you said, we have to regulate ourselves at times and take responsibility for how we're feeling and the stress load that we're bearing, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves during this busy season. Thank you, Gerry.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks a lot, Kelvin.